we're gonna do next is actually create the block. So far we have a empty plugin that we just created, and we're gonna create the block within the plugin. So our block is gonna consist of 3 files. The first one that we're gonna create is a style sheet. We're gonna call editor.css, and that is gonna be the style sheet that is gonna be used when we are using the editor side of the block, which is within Gutenberg. When we go and edit a post or a page using the new Gutenberg editor, that style sheet is going to be loaded to sort of give style to our block. The second thing that we're going to add is a style CSS file, and this file is going to be loaded when we use the front end side of the block. And finally, we're going to leave those empty for now. And finally, we're going to create a new file called hello world block, and this is going to be the main file. Now, if you remember, Gutenberg was coded using React, so that's all JavaScript code. So we're going to code our block using JavaScript, and you're going to see what that looks like in a second. The first thing we need to do is tell WordPress that we need to load those files when we're going to use the Gutenberg editor. So for that, we're going to add a couple of actions. It looks like this. So basically, we have one action that's called Enqueuing Block Editor Assets, and we're going to call our function called HWB Enqueue Editor Assets that is going to enqueue 2 files. The first is going to be the JavaScript file, hwbblock.js, and the second is going to be the editor CSS file. The second action is going to be Enqueue Block Assets, and that's just going to be called when we are using the front end side of the block. And what we're going to do then is just enqueue the front end CSS file. So this is what PHP looks like to load up a block. Right now it's just enqueuing the files, and what we're going to do is come here to the JS file and just write a simple console log just to make sure this is being loaded. Whoops. Writing and talking is not as easy as they say. So I am gonna go to posts. I'm gonna create a new post using Gutenberg, and we're gonna make sure that that hello world is being printed, which is not. So oh, I didn't save this file. Let's save it. Let's reload the page. There we go. We have our hello world. That means that at least our JS code is being loaded. And what we're gonna do now is actually create the block. That's gonna be JavaScript code. So the first thing that we're gonna do is create an IIFE. An IIFE is a immediately invoked function expression that looks like this. Basically what we're doing here, if you've never heard of an IIFE, is just restricting the scope of our variables to that function. We don't want to be creating global variables, because we can create conflicts with other variables created by other maybe not so well developed plugins or themes, or we don't want to have conflicts with WordPress variables that, like for example, if we create a variable called WP, which would be a bad idea. But just in case, what we're doing here is restricting their scope over variables to that function. And what we're gonna do is create the plugin. Now the plugin is gonna look a little bit like this. What we're doing here, I'm going to go line by line explaining what this is. What we're doing here is first, we're just creating shorthands for these API functions that WordPress exposes. So one is wp.element.createElement, and we're going to use that in a second. The other one is register block type, and that's the first one that we're going to use. We're going to use that function to register the block. Now, registering means basically adding our block here. This is the block catalog, and it has these categories of blocks, so widgets and layout elements and formatting blocks and so on. We're going to register our block in one of those categories, and that was what this category property is for. Then we're going to give it a title, and we have these two functions that are very important. One is the edit function, and that function is going to be called on the editor's side of the block, and it's going to be called many times when we change some property of our block, and we're going to see that in a second. The second function is very important, is save, and that function is going to be called when we save the post or the page that we're working on. Be mindful that that function is also going to be called when drafts are saved or with the autosave process. So it might be called more than once, even if you don't click on the save button. And we're going to see that working in a second also. So let's start by registering the block type. The first thing that we need to do is give it a name, and the name needs to have a namespace, and we can use a slash for that. So I'm going to say hello world blog slash blog, just a very simple name. And the title, I'm going to say hello world blog. It's a little repetitive, but anyway. I am going to save that, and we're probably going to get an error. I'm going to reload this page and try to add. So here is the new block. This is because we registered it. I'm going to click it, and yeah, we're getting an error because the edit function is being called and it's not returning anything. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you by adding a console log here with the edit text. Then I'm going to reload this, and you see that the edit, it's being consoled out, and then we get the error. So what we're going to do here is just return something. Let's return a string and see what happens. There we go. We get a text element. I'm going to expect that. And this is our block div, and in there we get this text node. So whatever we're returning on the edit function is being basically printed, is being added to the DOM. Now let's do this the right way. We have this EL function here. If you remember, I think I mentioned before that Gutenberg is coded using React. The way React works is that we create DOM elements that are added to what is called a virtual DOM, which is like a copy of the DOM tree, but it's not the actual DOM tree, it's just a copy of it. And we're going to add nodes to that virtual DOM, and React is going to go over the changes and push the changes from the virtual DOM to the actual DOM, and there's very optimized process to do that. If you want to learn more, you can search for the virtual DOM in React. But basically we're going to return DOM elements here instead of strings. And for that, to create those elements, we're going to use the EL function. So I'm going to return an EL element. Now the first parameter is going to be the type of element, which maps to HTML tags, and the second parameter is going to be attributes. Now the attributes, they look like HTML attributes, but they're not written the same way. For example, for a class, we didn't use class, we used class name, and it follows the camel case syntax. Again, you can look for how to write attribute names in React. For now, we're just going to add some class. Let's say HWP block class, and the third parameter is going to be the child nodes. So here we can add one or more children to the P element. For now, we're just going to add one child node, and it's going to be a text node that says hello world. This is going to be enough to be able to add the block here. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to reload the page, and we should see a hello world when we add the block. Okay, we had an auto-saved post there, so the block was already there. And if we inspect it, we have the block div, and inside of it we have the P element that we didn't have before, and it has the class that we added as an attribute, and the child node that says hello world. I'm going to publish this now, and now something is going to happen. If I click here on more and go to code editor, we see this weird comment on the post content. Now what is this? What Gutenberg is going to be doing when we save is calling the save function, and it's going to add whatever is returned by the save function to the post content, surrounded by this weird comment that right now is not surrounding anything. It's just one because there's no content returned by the save function. But when we return something, and let's actually go ahead and do it. Let's return a string. Whoops. I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna remove this. There we go. I'm gonna reload the page. Yes, I want to reload it. We might get an error here. Yeah, there we go. I'm gonna explain what this is in a second. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the block again and add it. There we go. It says hello world. I'm gonna save it, and now I'm gonna go to the code editor. There we go. So we have the string returned by the save function surrounded by this weird comment. Now you might have seen this before. This is the same string that we use when we registered our block up here. So what Gutenberg is doing is basically running the save function, is getting whatever is returned by the save function and pushing it to the post content surrounded by that comment with the block, let's say, name around it. So Gutenberg is basically saving whatever is returned to the post content, and this is what is gonna be shown on the front end side of the editor. Let's click on preview and see what happens. So here we have that string. Now when Gutenberg runs on the front end, it's gonna find this comment and it's gonna say, oh, this is part of an HWB/block. This content belongs to that block, so it's gonna create an element for that content that is gonna be our block again, but on the front end side. This is gonna make much more sense in a minute. So for now, what we're gonna do is come back here, and we're gonna do this the right way too. Basically, we're gonna return another element. Now this element might be same type, can be different type. Anyway, let's use a span just for the sake of the example. Now we have hello world inside a span element for the save function, and hello world inside a p element for the edit. So let's see what happens. I'm going to reload this page and make an error again. Now what this error means is here it says expected a span an actual hello world by save function. What's going on here is that Gutenberg is trying to parse this content using our save function, and the save function is actually returning a span. So when Gutenberg runs our function, it's getting a span with the text hello world inside, but the actual content that's on the post type and that is trying to parse is just this string. So they don't match, and it says, dude, we have a problem here. You have some content that I'm trying to parse to your block definition and they're not matching. So what we're going to do to fix that is just go back to the visual editor and remove the block, the old block. And if we add it again and we save, then we're not going to get that error anymore. There we go. So now if I preview this, we get hello world, but it's not a paragraph, it's a span, because our save function is saving a span into the post content. Now usually what we want to do here is not having a fixed string, but rather something that the user can change and edit and then save and show that on the front end. So what we're going to do is use, instead of a paragraph, we're going to use another element that is provided by Gutenberg that allows the user to change the content. So what we're going to do here is use the plain text element. Instead of returning a P, we're going to use the plain text element, and instead of returning this, let's just do an empty string. For now, that's going to work. Here, instead of a span, I'm going to use a paragraph, which is more suitable for that. And again, let's use an empty string for now. Let's reload. Did I save? Yeah, I saved it. Let's reload this. Again, we have the validation that fails for our old block, so I'm going to remove it. And actually, I don't need to do that. Let's just add the new block. Now we have this text element that the user can change. We're getting all sorts of errors every time I press a key, and we're going to deal with that in a second. But this, so far, it makes much more sense. Now this error, T is not a function, is the worst error that possibly exists. But if we take a look at the stack trace, we say that it's failing on change. That may give a little bit of a clue. What it's basically saying is that this plain text needs an onChange function. Now we're going to define that as part of the attribute. So I'm going to open this a little bit like that, and we're going to add an onChange function right here. What this function is going to do is receive an argument, which is the new value. Let's say value. And for now, we're just going to console log it, just to know what's going on there. Everything looks good. I'm going to come here. I'm going to remove the block. Well, actually, we're going to get the old block again, I think. Yeah, we have the old block. So I'm going to remove it, forget about this, and add the block again. Now look what's going on. Every time I type something, we get a console log with the new value, and we don't get the error anymore. This makes much more sense. Now what we need to do, let's just new editor. Let's update this and see what happens. Now the posts are saved via Ajax, so the page is not being reloaded, and maybe we have no idea if this was saved or not, because at least we're not getting any errors. But I'm gonna preview this, and we'll see what happens. We have nothing. Why is this? Because our save function is returning an empty paragraph. So what's being saved to the post content is basically an empty paragraph. Now what we're going to do now is back to the visual editor, actually go back to the code, and we need to save this value somewhere so we can use it in the same function. And for that, we're going to use what it's called attributes. Now the attributes, it might be a complicated thing to grasp at first. So we're going to start very, very simple here. We're going to define attributes up here. An attribute is going to be an object that we can define as many properties as we want, and each property is going to basically represent one piece of data. Right now we're going to just save something called text. Now the text data element is going to be of a source children. The selector is going to be a p element, and the default text is going to be empty. What this is going to do is that when we load up the editor, it's going to look within our block, within this comment, the open and the close tag of this comment, it's going to look for a p tag. That's the selector. I could be using classes here, I could be using IDs. I'm just going to use the tag name. And by default, it's going to assign an empty string. But if you can find that p tag, it's going to set the value of text to whatever is inside the p tag. Does that make sense? So for now, oh, and that attribute is going to be passed to us to the edit and the save function inside this props argument. So let's start simple. Let's start with a console log of props. I'm going to say edit. I'm going to say save. Now let's run that. Let's go back to the visual editor. I'm going to reload the page. Oops, unexpected identifier. Oh, I was missing a comma here. There we go. Let's reload the page again. Good. So our save function is being called twice. That is to parse the content that we have on the post content and create the elements that we're going to use in the editor. And the edit function is being called again, and we are being passed these attributes that text is an empty array. That is because there was not content on the block. Now I'm going to remove the block. I'm going to create a new one just to refresh it. The edit function is being called again, and now I can write stuff here, and you're going to see that the console log function is being called. This was the autosave, but nothing is really changing on the attributes. We're never setting the attribute value when we change the text. So what we're going to do next is do that. And for that, what we're going to use is this set attributes function. Now here, instead of console logging that, we're going to do set attributes, and we're going to use an object that says set the text to value. Now this is going to change the attribute. What React is going to do behind the scenes is call our edit function again and pass the new attributes through the props And those attributes are going to have the new value that we're setting here. So we should see this console log happening every time we change the text. Now let's see that in action. I'm going to reload the page. Have a block? Yeah, let's remove the all block. And let's add it. Oh, we get an error. Set attributes is not defined. Set attributes is going to be part of the props that we get here. So I'm going to change it to props.set attributes. And actually we can see that in this console log. There we go. That's a function, save attributes. Okay, let's do it again. Take 2. Let's remove the old block. Let's add the new block. And now we see all these console logs going on. I'm going to clear that. So every time we change the content of the text editor, the attribute is being set, and that is changing the value of a text attribute. When this changes, any attribute changes, the edit function is being called again. The new attributes values are being pushed within the props argument, and we return a new element with the value. Now the value, when we were hard coding hello world, we were doing it here because our paragraph was showing the content as a child, as a text child. Right now we don't need that. I'm gonna actually remove this. But our save function is also getting the properties. So inside those properties, we have the text that we want to show on the front end. So when the save function is being called, you see here we're getting past the attributes 2, and the value of text is hello world, actually with a W. I'm doing that a lot. The save function is receiving these properties, which have the attributes, and the value of text is what we wrote here. So that's what we want to show on the front end. The way we're going to do that is actually adding it here. So props.text, sorry, that was some Spanish mixed in there. Props.text is the child node, the text node that we want to use for that paragraph. So I'm gonna reload this page. Again, remove the old block. Add the new block. Hello block developers. And update that. Now, if we go here to the code editor, we see that it's empty. Yeah. I forgot to say attributes. Let's do it again. Let's reload the page. Those are the things that happens when you do live coding. Let's remove the block, add it again. Hello block developers, update. Let's check the code editor. There we go. Now we get a paragraph element with the text that we wrote on the text editor, and that's being pushed to the post content. So I'm gonna view the post now, and we get what we wrote. If we go back, we get the post again. We can edit it on the visual editor. Oh, this is interesting. The code is not here. Why is it not here? Because we're not setting the initial value of the plain text. Let's set up the value. Now, here's an important distinction. I'm not setting the value as I'm doing with the p tag as a child node. I'm setting the value as a property of the plain text. And that's important, and that's because plain text, it's a React component. Now we're gonna go deeper into that in the next video when we create a more complicated block. But basically, just for now, know that the value of the plain text is not a child text like a paragraph. This would be what you do, for example, with an input tag. You set the value on the value tag, not as a child node. So we're going to set the value here, and the value is going to be props attributes text. This should be enough to fix that. I'm going to reload that. And there we go. We have the initial value. I'm going to update that, save, view the post. It's been updated. And that's the end of our first Hello World block. Very easy example. This is probably as easy as it gets. This is our JavaScript block. We register it, give it a title, a category. We register the data that we want to use with it, save with it. In this case, it's just the text. It's being pulled from the children's of the paragraph. Default text is empty. We have an edit function that is being called. It's being called on the editor side of the block. We get properties that have those attributes where we store our data. We're using a plain text element provided by WordPress that is basically a text area, and we're giving it a class name and a change function that is being called every time we change the value of the text, an initial value, and every time the edit function is called, we're generating a new plain text element with a new value, and React is taking care of adding it to the virtual DOM, and then basically knowing that what's on the real DOM is different from what's on the virtual DOM and synchronizing that. And we have a save function that is being called when we save the post. It's basically grabbing the value from the attributes and stamping a paragraph node into the post content with that value. That's the end of this video. I'm going to see you on the next video when we create a more complicated example, and just be prepared. We're going to go deep into React developing. If you have no experience with that, don't worry, because we're going to see line by line what's going on, and hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you soon.